These people are, I think with the exception of one of them, are in public service. So I would add to that, what can we do together to serve the public? So thank you all for that contribution. All right, let's get you hooked up, man. Yeah. All right. So Mark Orgeron is a data privacy specialist at the University of New Mexico and a current co-chair for IAPP's Albuquerque Knowledge Unit chapter. He holds several master's degrees and is certified through IAPP and GIAC. So without further ado, thank you very much for being here. Take it away.
Excellent. Thank you. Hopefully this will, can you guys hear me okay? I'm horrible with microphones. So real quick, I just want to give a shout out to Dell. Dell's one of my good friends. Everything that he does, everything that I see that he presents on is just always insightful. And so I'm kind of honored today to get to present after Dell. I'm a little disappointed he didn't invite me to the panel. Hopefully I'm invited to beers later. But anyway, let's give one more round of applause for Dell because So, and I appreciate the introduction. My name is Mark Orgeron. I'll jump into that in a second. But along with the panel that just happened, I got to say I really appreciate a lot of the presentations this morning because they're going to tie into this, right? Mark started off talking about philosophy and Kant and Plato, and that's all right up my alley. And then Mari was talking about community. This is going to be more of an ethics presentation, and there's nothing that really shapes our ethics and values more than the communities that we're a part of. And then, so I think it's just been a great tie-in for what I'm going to talk to you guys about today. So the presentation is just because you can, should you, and it's understanding the ethical divide between permission and protection. And so because I'm from academia at the University of New Mexico, I'm going to spend 37 and a half minutes explaining who I am, and then be confused as to why I ran out of time. Actually, thank you for the great introduction. You pretty much covered everything for me. Jeff Gassaway was supposed to be a co-presenter with me today. Unfortunately, due to the events that happened on campus, he was pulled away and is over on main campus dealing with that. But the big takeaway from this slide that I want everybody to really kind of understand is Jeff and I are both engaged people, and we're both very community-centric people. And so later this afternoon, a week from now, 6 months from now, if you have a question about any of this stuff or something comes up specifically with data privacy, feel free to reach out to us. Like, we are more than happy to talk about this stuff pretty much until your ears bleed, because we live it every day at the university. So then again, being from the university, I always like to have some student learning outcomes. Because this is sort of more of an ethical presentation, I want everybody to walk away from this with just a different perspective today. So I'm not going to outline anything other than just kind of this loose principle of cybersecurity protects the institution, while data privacy protects the individual. One of the approaches we take a lot at the university, especially when it comes to data privacy, is we look at it really as a human rights issue and a civil rights matter. We work very closely with our ethics and compliance office, and I'll get a little bit into that with some examples later on. But one of the things about this presentation is there's no right answer. And so if I say something that aggravates you, good. If I say something that you totally agree with, good. I want everybody to leave today with just a slightly different perspective on how you're thinking about cybersecurity and data privacy, and kind of start to think, are these two sides of the same coin, or are these competing entities? And I think at times they're both. They can switch back and forth. And so that starts to really pull into our own ethics and morals on how to engage some of these problems, especially with AI. Talking about AI, I love the agentic AI. One of my favorite hobbies has been making deepfakes of my friends, and I charge my friends' kids $100 if they want a deepfake of their parents saying they don't have to go to school today. So AI, it's a blast. I think you probably just got a little taste of my ethics and where I stand on some of this stuff. But I like to play around and see where we can push the envelope. So we're going to define some concepts real quick, and then so for cybersecurity, we're going to focus on protection of systems, networks, and data from attacks. And then our main concern is really some of those traditional principles, like the CIA triad, right? Like very, very technical and very system focused. Whereas data privacy, we're going to focus on the rights of individuals over their personal data. So data is important, right? We need to understand that. We need to define that. But on the privacy side, we're really trying to ask that question of, do we need to collect this, and what is ultimately going to happen to this data, not just what are we doing with it today. And then we're concerned with consent, purpose, transparency, and minimization. So when we talk about people, process, and technology, the process, or the privacy side is really that people and process, where that cybersecurity, I look at it as the process and the technology. And then again, just to reiterate, cybersecurity is about protection, data privacy is about permission. And then we have some technical versus ethical areas. So the goal for cybersecurity, prevent unauthorized access, data privacy, ensure proper and ethical use. And you know what, I'm not gonna read through these. I'll let you guys just kind of digest them. But again, the big thing that I want folks to start to understand is really looking at where are we going with this? What is the problem that we're trying to solve, and what are the potential outcomes, both good and bad? Right, and so this last one, the primary question is, can we secure it? That's always an important question. And then should we even collect it? I'm gonna get into some case studies later that sort of deal with that. But on the previous panel, we mentioned security cameras. If you've been following the news today of what happened at UNM, security cameras all over campus would have been huge. They would have been a great resource for the police right now. However, security cameras collect a lot of data. And so that's going to differ on your environment of how those are really deployed. So in university, some people love the university setting, some people hate the university setting, because it's a diverse environment where young people are allowed to come and express their minds and sort of grow who they are as a person. And so if we have a campus laden with security cameras, that can be a huge asset being right off Central and University, especially help with police investigations, can mitigate crime. So there's a lot of positives with that. But then the question is our faculty who are doing research in kind of unique or risky areas to understand the human condition, are they going to be limited by some of this additional data collection? Are our students going to be allowed to fully grow and develop and engage in social discourse if we have a campus that's sort of become a big brother state? Is there a right answer to that? I don't know. I think everybody in this room probably has a slightly different opinion, and that's a good thing. And these are the questions we need to talk about. And so as we get more into the surveillance, the big data, this is just the sort of, because you can, we have the access for it, what should you? And so, is the user aware? Cameras are getting smaller and smaller. We have all sorts of pixel tracking, things like that our users, our everyday users, don't know what data they're necessarily giving up. And then can it be misused even unintentionally? So I'm going to kick off my first case study here with Target. I kind of like Target, right? Because data cybersecurity, we always have a target on our back with what we're doing. But does anybody remember maybe about 10 years ago, Target was sending notifications to pregnant women? Does anybody remember this controversy? So this is always fascinating to me. And I actually had a friend who got caught up in this, and every few months would post on Facebook about Target sending her coupons for prenatal vitamins, for diapers, for different things you would need along the way for a pregnancy. Now, great marketing idea from Target, right? Like you're gonna increase sales if you know you have this user group who's looking at things that are gonna kick off something that's on a 9-month cycle, like a pregnancy. This is a great idea, great marketing plan. However, this friend of mine had a very early miscarriage. And every time Target sent her another marketing notification, it sort of like reopened that wound for her. And so was that Target's intention? Absolutely not. But when I talk about unintended consequences and what are we collecting, what type of data are we collecting and why, these are sort of those types of scenarios we need to sort of formulate and ask, like what could go wrong? And I just remember my friend going through this and, here's your advertisement for diapers. Here's your advertisement for onesies. And this woman was a paramedic who worked on an ambulance in a high crime area, much like Albuquerque, and it threw her off her game. So you can kind of see the cascading events here of you have a data collection, and then there wasn't a way for her to remove herself from this because she wasn't even aware that that data had been collected. And so this is a study that I like to kind of kick things off of, or a scenario, to kind of get people thinking about like, this is bigger than cybersecurity. This is bigger than just the regular threat vector. This is bigger than zero trust. There's more things at play, especially when we talk about cultivating environments. So, just talked about Target. 23andMe. Who's heard of what's been going on with 23andMe? So I'm gonna give you guys some information about me. This is probably like second or third date mark material. But I was originally adopted as a child. And so early on when 23andMe came about, I spit in the little tube, sent it off, and got all the information I wanted. It was a great service for me. I don't look anything like my family. You look at a family picture, and it's like you say, who doesn't belong? There's Mark. And so for me, 23andMe was a great tool to sort of understand where I came from as a person. However, 23andMe is going through a bankruptcy now. And that data there was some questions of what was gonna happen to the user data. Now 23andMe has gone out and said, we're gonna purge this data if you send in a request. And to date, about 15% of their database has been deleted from the potential sale. And so for me, this is an example of a company standing by their privacy policy. And so if you're gonna create a privacy policy, you have to follow through what it says. And there's been a lot of advocacy groups. The State Attorney General for California has really put a lot of pressure on 23andMe to give people an easy avenue for deleting that data. I've deleted my data. I'm operating under the assumption that it got deleted. We'll find out in 6 to 10 years. But again, as we're talking about GRC and those types of things, it's really trying to have that forethought of we're doing this today, but what is the landscape going to look like in 5, 6, 10 years from now? And then along those lines, this is another fascinating one to me. There's a run of like fine dining restaurants in the San Francisco Bay Area. And what they're doing is when you book a reservation, they're going and basically creating a portfolio of you based off of your online footprint. So that way when you go into the restaurant, they're going to give you more of a tailored, customized experience. In this article that's linked to that everybody should have access to later on. Yes? Yes. You guys can read this at your leisure. But what they're doing is, one of the people that was mentioned has gone to one of these restaurants that's been doing this 3 years in a row for her birthday, so she's a customer, and the restaurant found out that she likes penguins. So they created a penguin theme for the restaurant for her birthday that night, right? Like totally benign, right? It's kind of a fun thing. Again, great marketing idea. But the question is what's happening to this data once the restaurants don't use it anymore? Or is there a line that these restaurants are crossing with information that they're collecting? Because they're basically creating intelligence portfolios on their clients. Are those getting secured? Does all the staff have access to it? So there's a lot of different things there that come up in my mind. Is that sort of like, we can do it, there's maybe a good business reason for it, but then should we really do it, or are there ways to mitigate risk in those areas? And I kind of picked these examples. I didn't want to come up and bore you guys about UNM. We do a lot of cool stuff there, but I wanted people to think about these different types of diverse scenarios that are happening every day across every walk of life, and start to apply your ethics to them, your morals. Is that something you would want to have happen to you? Would you like to walk into a restaurant for the first time and everybody on the staff knows your name? There are some days for me that'd be awesome. Like, oh, I like Clyde Bay's whiskey? Psh, drop it right in front of me. And then there's other days, I just want to be totally anonymous in the crowd. I don't want anybody to talk to me. And so giving people the ability to sort of live their lives, form those communities how they want, is a big piece of this in our approach of how we're looking at things within data privacy. And so kind of toward an ethical data governance, right, we're going to build cybersecurity and privacy by design. It's kind of standard process. Minimize data collection, only what's needed. Standard process. Communicate data practices clearly. This is one that should be a standard process, but I see people fail at all the time. Who remembers when the Facebook Messenger app became a thing, right? So a good friend of mine from college was actually on the team that built that app. They never intended that app to steal all the data that it did. However, something happened in the development that they could never actually figure out. And so they never, I shouldn't say they never, right? But with Facebook and a lot of their practices, they're not always communicating to the end user of what's being taken, what's being marketed based off their data. And one of the big things we're big at UNM is empowering user control over your data. We give students the ability to opt out of things. We give students the ability to have a privacy flag on their account so you can't look them up in our online directory. And so giving that individual the ability to choose to be in that community or not. And then the last big thing is a lot of times in cybersecurity and data privacy, we're always seen as kind of a pathway to no, right? Like, you come to us, we're going to tell you, no, you can't do that for X, Y, and Z. But the goal is to not limit innovation, it's to have those conversations, it's to have those debates. I wish Jeff was here today, was able to make it, because he and I debate all the time. He comes from a very traditional IT side. I came from more of a physical security side. I had the misfortune, however you want to look at it, for working for our governor during COVID for a while, and had some very interesting perspectives there about what type of data we're collecting during COVID. So he and I are constantly debating what our pathway forward, what our compliance should look like. And through those debates, we generally get to a right answer. And so having those open communications, being able to have those discussions with your teams is huge, especially people who are not necessarily technically savvy with those end users. We work a lot with our attorneys, our compliance group, and then faculty. I like to say that at UNM we call them faculty, because if we could call them adults, we would. But they're glad that one got a laugh. So we have some interesting groups at UNM who don't always understand the things that we do. And so being able to engage them is important, especially when we're talking about what type of data we're collecting. And then some questions that we tell our stakeholders, if you're going to be doing this, try to ask yourself these questions. Are we building trust, or are we eroding it? Would I be okay if this was my data? How does this serve the public good? So along those lines, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, all my contact is up here. We have an IAPP chapter. I'm one of the co-chairs. If folks are interested in that, we'd love to get you involved. We do sort of alternating educational events that are generally over Zoom, and then local networking events. So if that's a community you're interested in getting more involved in, yes, sir. Absolutely. So the question was, can I tell you guys more about that group? So IAPP stands for the International Association of Privacy Professionals. I would look at it as sort of like heads and tails, right? So the heads, you have IAPP on the privacy side. The tail is like you have SANS and CISSP. So the IAPP is going to be more law, ethics, compliance, regulatory focused, where the SANS and the CISSP are going to be more technically focused within the information security and privacy environment. Yes, sir.
Sounds a little bit outside the specifics of what you're going through and things like that.
So yeah, a little outside of the specifics of, the framework of what you're talking about here, but once you start getting into like the end user's experience with things, that's where oftentimes a lot of these no's and other things oftentimes really impact people's lifespan and their livelihood and everything else. Do you have thoughts or feelings on specific things like blockers, ad blockers, strippers, the things that give the end users some tools to sometimes evade or get around some of the annoyances that get tossed in their way by the designers?
So if our UNM attorneys were sitting right here, they'd hear my answer and they'd be like, he does listen. So my answer to that is it depends. I think it really depends on your environment and what you're trying to do. And when you think about like the CIA triad, there's certain environments where you want a lot of accessibility and maybe confidentiality doesn't always matter. But then we have certain things in federal government where we want a lot of confidentiality or low accessibility. Sort of with my experience with 23andMe, I wanted my data to have a high level of confidentiality. I wanted that to stay, the integrity to stay. And then I wanted a high level of accessibility for me, but nobody else. So there's certain things we look at. We look at everything like that sort of on a case-by-case basis. We try not to limit things really for academic freedom. We want to have people have that freedom. When Facebook first came about, and I wish Jeff was here because he would explain this to you because he was the one who did it. We banned Facebook from campus. So you could not access Facebook from the university network because of how poor their privacy policy was at the time. Was that a good idea? I don't know. We did it. But more and more, generally within our environment, the only things that we try to block or strip away are things that we can clearly say this is a threat to our campus community. Yeah.
Sometimes I feel hopeless about privacy because the concession of privacy is built into the terms of service on the device, the operating system, the application, the service. All levels are a concession. So how can you reasonably approach best practices for privacy when so much of that concession is built into being allowed to use the service in the first place?
So this is one of those things where I think as individuals, we really need to empower ourselves. I think that's first and foremost, and I think that's going to be one of the hardest things in this. In the United States, we give so much information out for free. And the question is for us, right, as a community, whether it's this B-Sides community, our regional community of just IT professionals, what are we comfortable with sharing, and what do we need to keep private, right? So as a society, HIPAA information, personal health information, we've decided that this is going to be an area where we're not going to talk about it so much so that people get it wrong in a positive way, I think. And so I think the first thing is facilitating these conversations, but then looking at things like GDPR. You know, what are their foundations on, right? Like, there's a lot of things from GDPR that go back to pre-World War II, information the Nazis used to basically target other political factions. And so it's an interesting paradigm. I think there's a lot of thinking in that area that's probably the correct thinking that gets viewed more as radicalized thinking a lot of times. But I think it's our willingness as people to come in and look at a company like Facebook or look at the Googles. You know, I use all these companies, so I'm not trying to bash them or throw them under the bus. They're just easy household names of saying, you know, I'm going to limit my service usage because you're engaging in these practices. Sorry, does that answer your question? I felt a little politician there. I feel like I was channeling Michael Padilla there for a second.
Mark, what can we do to protect or educate people about privacy? I know young people are so willing to click and post and post and post. They don't know that in the future, a loan application may be denied, a job may not appear. What can we do to help them solve that issue?
So that's a great question. I'm going to start that off with a joke, because I do fashion myself as a little bit of a comedian. I got some things that I'm going to be working out at Casada's Comedy Club later. So I appreciate you guys' tolerance today. But I grew up in that generation, right? It was the early days of America Online, AIM, things like that. And my parents said, don't give out anybody, you know, don't give out where we live. Don't meet anybody online. You know, don't meet strangers, right? And now from my phone, in 5 minutes, right, like I'm gonna order some food for dinner, I'm gonna get on Tinder and find a date for this weekend, and I'm gonna have Uber drive me around wherever I need to go. So it's the culture around all of that has shifted significantly, right? There was that initial fear to that comfort level that we have now. And I think one of the biggest things, especially working on the campus environment and seeing like the amount of crime that we have in Albuquerque, I've been fortunate to wear other hats that have done things like that have been like anti-terrorism, anti-crime, and getting to work with people like our district attorney and the Albuquerque Police Department. There's a lot of like needless crime that happens by young people. It's just sort of like, I'm doing this for Instagram. I'm doing this for likes. And that's a big problem. It's probably bigger than kind of what you were envisioning, but getting away from this culture, this social media influencer culture. It definitely has its place in our society, but I think, and this is totally world according to Mark, you're gonna hear about some radical ideas. I think kids shouldn't put football pads on until they're at least 16 years old. I think some of our cybersecurity and COPA laws and things like that, I think 13 is too young. I have some neighbors that I really like. They don't have a TV, they have a projector screen, and they do family movie night. 3 kids, elementary school, their oldest is 13. He's got a flip phone. And their parents have told their kids they get $100 a year for every year they're not on social media. Are there ways that that's sort of depriving them? Absolutely. But you know what? These kids are playing outside. They're reading. It's kind of like, you look at my neighborhood, it's like the 1980s with kids out on bikes and pogo sticks. And so again, I think it comes back to our individual ethics and morals. I have other friends who their kids, I don't have any kids by the way, so I'm totally looking in through the fishbowl, judging everybody on this one. But then I have other friends, their kids just sit behind an iPad all day, and their parents have no idea what they're doing online. And so I think it's one of those things that definitely it takes a village. You know, in New Mexico, we have one of the worst education systems in the country. You know, does that factor into this issue? Absolutely. And so I think it's a multifaceted factor that, you know, we just need to get people talking about it. You know, and I'm not talking about it like in terms of the political yelling that we have, but people, you know, facilitated conversations, panels like what y'all had, events like this. just to start to shift that paradigm and get people to understand, like, this can have an impact. You know, these 5 or 6 likes and shares that you got on the video are gonna be that dopamine hit for the next 5 minutes, but are you even gonna remember it 5 years from now when you can't apply for a loan, things like that? At the university, one of our compliance regulations is FERPA, and that protects student work up to a certain point. At the university, we like to give students that environment where they can express themselves. And it's important to us to protect that data, so if a student writes something in one of their classes that's like totally radical, you know, I don't care if it's left wing, right wing, like whatever, you know, whatever the opposite of your belief is, right? We want to give them the environment to express that, right, and then have the discourse. But what we don't want is, as that student's grown, evolved, changed, their perspective has changed, you know, maybe they've done things in their life to travel a little bit, broaden their horizons, you know, we don't want that paper then to come back and be a hindrance to them later on in life. And so I think that's one of the things we do very well at the university, is sort of protecting that in the long run and giving our faculty environments where they can let kids, right, because that's what our college students are, they're kids, have that freedom, but then we can protect them. It's just all these other environments where there isn't that oversight. So I had kind of left this presentation a little bit short, more for questions and conversation. And so, no, I think somebody was just giving me the finger over there. So feel free to ask questions. I'm happy to field anything. Again, all my contact information is up here. I'm happy to talk offline about anything. But you know, the time is yours. Otherwise, I'm happy to give everybody a little.
You know, I have a comment actually. I mean, just reflecting about what you're saying, to me it sounds like contextual integrity. You said the word integrity a moment ago, but it's this contextual integrity that exists now for the little one, right? Which then will change over time as their identity changes. Because like you led with in the beginning, our identity is coming out of the communities that we're in. And so we really want that contextual integrity to follow our identity, to follow us, and not have anybody exploit that. I just wanted to see if you had any thoughts on that.
So I'm gonna take you down a rabbit hole. So for a while, I was working on a PhD that really focused on radicalism, how people radicalized and then ultimately jumped to extremist behavior. And has anybody ever heard of the historical event in the United States, Harper's Ferry? So Harper's Ferry is like kind of like the first ever domestic terrorism event in the United States. And the people who pulled off this heinous act of violence were radicals and extremists. But what they were fighting for was an anti-slavery moment. And so this terrorist attack that they pulled off at Harper's Ferry was basically on slave owners, trying to highlight that owning slaves was unjust. And I like using this as an example because now, today, right, like we look at equal rights and how the country's evolved, we would never consider those people like radicals or extremists. And so it's really the cultural shifts within our society that are we're gonna dictate this. And you look at some of our political environments right now, it's difficult to just have honest conversations with people without people getting upset. And I think the power is really with the people, as cliche as that sounds, to make those changes. And it's all interconnected. The data privacy, some of the things that have passed recently with AI and not being able to be regulated for 10 years, there's gonna be some great innovations, right? But that's gonna create all sorts of quagmires for us. And so again, I think it's really comes down to us taking ownership of our space and our communities. So Mike, is that?
I mean, yeah, I think that's a great response. To go further into the rabbit hole, I see us as needing this shared or collective understanding of reality. I was just having this conversation with this gentleman yesterday. We tend to have a different interpretation of facts as individuals, right? And so at this conference or in a group discussion, what we're then trying to do is create this shared understanding or collective understanding, right? But to do that, we need to understand each other's goals and what principles we're operating with, right? And what strategies we will use to adopt or get to those goals, right? And so it's this collective understanding that I think we're missing right now, but we're creating it, we're trying to create it, right?
100%. And you talk about truth. One of my biggest pet peeves in society right now are people like, it's my truth. This is my truth. No, it's your perspective. And we need to remember that. And I think we've somehow subbed out the words truth and perspective too much. And it's getting back to being able to share perspectives in healthy ways. And a lot of this stuff, right, like, there's not always a wrong answer. Like, there's definitely things we could do very wrong, but when it comes to privacy, you know, there's a lot of right answers, and there's a lot of things we can do better. And I think if we start focusing on the things we can do better and making those things better, that's gonna be the pathway to get down. And sharing those perspectives, like, I'm a very open person. Part of the dynamic between Jeff and I, and if you ever had the pleasure of meeting my boss, Jeff, the ISPO from UNM, we are like solar opposites. It's crazy. But Jeff is very, very, very private. And I'm a person where if you ask me a direct question, I'm gonna give you a direct answer. And it doesn't necessarily bother me so much. And that's my perspective, whereas the environment that Jeff grew up in, he needed to be a private person to sort of survive. And so, and I probably have already shared too much about him than he would be comfortable with. But he's not here, so we'll just try not to make an Epstein joke right now. We'll just, there's a minute there in that camera we can edit out, I'm sure. But it's, told you. Sorry, I've totally just threw myself off. But I think that's the thing, is we need to all look at, like, okay, what are my privacy values? What are your privacy values? What are your privacy values? And then bring that to the conversation and say, okay, what works for the group? And then what are additional controls we can put in for those people who need a little bit more to feel comfortable?
I feel like you and I could talk for hours and hours and hours. Does anybody else have any questions? All right. Well, thank you very much. We're going to go ahead and take a break right after this. We'll be back